STERILE Billionaire finds out he's a father 20 years later, but it puts his marriage in jeopardy. Alex Pierce sat in his expansive office, the skyline of Manhattan spreading out before him. His life, much like the city, was polished, controlled, and well-structured. He had built it all: wealth, success, a beautiful wife, and a perfect marriage. Or so he thought. The letter came quietly, slipping under his office door on a Thursday afternoon. No return address. Just his name, written in neat, delicate handwriting. He picked it up, an inexplicable weight settling in his stomach. Curiosity and dread clung to him as he tore it open. The words were stark, brutal in their simplicity. "I'm your daughter. My name is Emma. The DNA test confirms you are my father." Alex blinked, rereading the lines. He couldn't comprehend what he was reading. He had always known he was sterile. His inability to have children was a known fact. It had shaped his entire life, closing doors on the very idea of fatherhood. How could this be real? How could this Emma be his daughter? His hands trembled as he scanned the page again, but there was no denying it. The words were clear. He had a child, a daughter. Panic crept in. Could this be a mistake? Or worse, a scam? But something in his gut told him it wasn't. He had to know for sure. He needed to find out if this was a lie or a terrifying truth that would change everything. The silence in the office pressed down on him, as though the city outside had vanished. All he could hear was the frantic beating of his own heart. Days passed in a haze. Alex couldn't shake the thought of Emma. Her name haunted him. How could a child exist when he'd been told he was incapable of fatherhood? He tried to tell himself it was a mistake, but every time he closed his eyes, her face appeared in his mind. He had to know the truth. That's when he decided he would take the DNA test. He needed answers, no matter the consequences. So, he called the lab. He scheduled it for the following day. The weight of his decision was almost unbearable, but he couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. The test was quick, a simple swab of his cheek. It felt like a lifetime as he waited for the results. During the wait, Alex found it hard to focus on anything else. His mind was consumed with the thought of this daughter. How could this be possible? The more he thought about it, the more the reality of the situation sank in. He had a child, whether he was ready for it or not. Finally, the email came. The results were in. His hands were shaking as he opened it. The screen glared back at him with the cold certainty he feared. Positive. You are the biological father of Emma Harris. The word struck him like a punch to the gut. He staggered back from his desk, his head spinning. This couldn't be true. He had no idea how to process what he was reading. He had been told that fatherhood was not an option for him. How had this happened? Alex felt the ground beneath him shift, his entire life suddenly in question. There was no turning back now. The truth hit Alex like a freight train. It had been days since he received the DNA results, and yet every time he tried to wrap his mind around it, it felt unreal. How could he, someone who had always believed he was incapable of fatherhood, have a child? He sat alone in his penthouse apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the test results on his phone. The words on the screen were clear. You are the biological father of Emma Harris. But the weight of the discovery left him disoriented, unable to move, unable to think. The image of her, Emma, haunted him. Her face had appeared in his mind more than once in the past few days, but it was always fleeting, as if his mind couldn't hold on to the idea of her for too long. Was she real? Was she some cruel joke? He felt overwhelmed, consumed by the confusion that spun around him. How had this happened? He had been sterile, he had always been sterile. And yet, there was Emma, a young girl he'd never known existed, his daughter. The questions were endless. How could he have missed this? Was she really his? What would this mean for his marriage to Olivia? For years, Alex had been at the top of his game, the CEO of a major company, respected by everyone who knew him. But in this moment, he felt small, insignificant, like a boy playing at being a man, with the weight of an entire life about to come crashing down on him. The life he had so carefully built, the life that had been perfect in its pristine image, was suddenly fractured beyond recognition. As the realization settled in, Alex's thoughts turned to Olivia. She had been his rock. She was the person who had stood by him through everything. But how could he tell her this? How could he tell her that he had kept this secret, a secret that could destroy their marriage? Would she ever look at him the same way again? Would she ever trust him again? He needed to talk to her. But how could he explain something so incomprehensible? How could he make sense of a reality that felt as though it belonged to someone else? Olivia noticed the change immediately. Alex had always been the type to bottle things up, to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders and never show it. But now there was something different in him. His demeanor had shifted. He was distant, lost in thought, as though something was gnawing at him, pulling him away. At first, she assumed it was work. Alex's company was going through some significant changes, and the pressure had been mounting. But as the days wore on, Olivia began to sense that there was something else, something deeper, more personal, that was causing him to retreat. His answers were short, his smiles forced. He barely looked her in the eye anymore, and when he did, there was a flicker of guilt there, something he couldn't hide. The tension was palpable, suffocating the space between them. She tried to reach out, but each time, Alex pushed her away. It was as if a wall had gone up between them, and no matter how hard she tried to climb it, it only seemed to get taller. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Olivia finally couldn't take it anymore. The silence had stretched on too long, the uncertainty too heavy. She put her fork down and met his eyes, searching for any trace of the man she had married. The man who had always been open with her, who had shared everything, even the darkest parts of his soul. "Alex, what's going on?" she asked softly. Her voice trembled, and for the first time, she could feel the worry creeping into her chest. "You've been so distant. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when I know something's wrong." Alex's heart raced. The last thing he wanted to do was tell Olivia the truth. But the silence between them had become unbearable, and the weight of his secret was crushing him. He couldn't hide from it anymore, couldn't hide from her. I have something I need to tell you," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands shook as he put down his glass of wine. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Olivia's gaze intensified, her eyes narrowing in concern. "What is it, Alex?" She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You can tell me anything." But Alex felt his throat tighten. The words wouldn't come. How could he explain something so complicated? Something that threatened to unravel everything they had worked for? For a long moment, they just sat there, two people in a marriage, but miles apart. Olivia waited, her heart pounding in her chest, praying for him to say something that would end the silence. Finally, Alex's voice broke through the quiet, and he spoke the words that would change everything. The room felt unbearably small. Alex could barely breathe as the weight of his secret pressed down on him, threatening to crush him entirely. Olivia's hand was still resting on his, and yet it felt as though a chasm had opened between them. The warmth of her touch was no comfort now. He had spent years building a life with her, carefully constructing a fortress of trust and intimacy. But now, in this moment, that fortress was crumbling piece by piece. His breath was shallow, his palms sweaty. The words he needed to say seemed to have lodged themselves somewhere deep inside him, refusing to come out. He wanted to tell her everything, but what would it mean for their life? Olivia waited patiently, her gaze unwavering. She had always been the one to listen, to provide a safe space for Alex to be vulnerable. But today, she could sense the hesitation in his eyes. There was something haunting him, something buried deep that he wasn't ready to face. Alex cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. "Olivia." He stopped, shaking his head as if to clear the fog in his mind. He had always been good with words, but now he found himself at a loss. How could he explain something so impossible? "I'm not sure how to tell you this," his voice cracked. "But it's something I've known for a long time, and it's something I should have told you before. Alex," Olivia interrupted softly. She leaned in closer, her eyes searching his, desperate for him to open up. "Whatever it is, we'll get through it together. You don't have to hide from me." The vulnerability in her voice almost broke him. He had built his entire life on the belief that he could keep his darkest secrets hidden. But now, in front of her, that illusion shattered. There was no way to hide anymore. I have a daughter, he finally blurted out. His words hung in the air like a bitter confession. Olivia recoiled, her hand pulling away from his as though she had been burned. Her eyes widened in shock, disbelief flooding her expression. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you mean you have a daughter?" Alex closed his eyes, fighting to keep the tears at bay. "I just found out her name is Emma. She's my daughter." And the DNA test confirmed it. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia sat there, stunned, her mind struggling to process what Alex had just said. She had always known that Alex had been through his own struggles, but this was something entirely different. She opened her mouth to speak, but found no words. How could this be happening? How could he have kept this from her for so long? The night was long, too long. Alex couldn't sleep. He lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The weight of his confession had settled heavily over him, but it wasn't the guilt that kept him awake. It was the fear that Olivia's world would shatter, that their marriage, which had once seemed so unbreakable, would collapse under the weight of his lies. He couldn't believe he had told her. He had lived with that secret for so long, thinking it was his burden to carry alone. But now that it was out, Alex realized that the consequences were far greater than he could have imagined. Olivia was silent, distant. She hadn't spoken since his confession, and that silence felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He glanced at the clock, 3:45 a.m. Still no word from her. No message, no sign that she was willing to listen. He had expected anger, confusion, perhaps even betrayal, but not this cold, unyielding silence. It terrified him. The morning light filtered in through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Olivia had left. She wasn't there. Alex's heart sank as he reached for his phone, scrolling through the messages, hoping for something, anything. There was nothing. No calls, no texts. It was as if she had vanished. When he finally saw her later that afternoon, she was standing at the door, her suitcase beside her. She looked like a stranger. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there was something else, something colder in the way she held herself. "I think we need some space," Olivia said, her voice low, trembling with emotion, but firm in its finality. "I don't know what to say right now, Alex. I need to process this, all of it." Alex's breath caught in his throat. "Olivia, please don't go. Please, just let me explain." "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I need time. I don't even know what to think. I thought we had everything. But now, everything feels like a lie." The door closed softly behind her, and Alex was left standing in the middle of the empty room, a hollow ache in his chest. The silence that followed was suffocating. His life had just been split into two parts, the life he had before Emma and the life he had now. And as the door slammed shut, he realized that he might not be able to reconcile them. He might not be able to reconcile himself. The hours stretched on like days. Alex couldn't shake the image of Olivia leaving. The way she had stood there at the door, her suitcase in hand, as though she were walking away from a life she no longer recognized. It wasn't the first time their marriage had been tested. There had been other moments, smaller fractures, but nothing like this. This was different. This was something Alex had never anticipated. Olivia wasn't just angry. She was broken, and so was he. He paced the apartment, unable to settle, the walls feeling too close, the air too thick with regret. His mind replayed the moment over and over again, the way her face had fallen when he told her about Emma, the raw disbelief in her eyes, the way she had recoiled from him. But it wasn't just the shock. It was the feeling of betrayal that lingered in the space between them. She felt lied to. She felt like her entire reality had been upended. Alex had never felt so small. How could he have kept this from her? How could he have lived with this lie for so long? He thought of all the times they had sat together, laughing, sharing intimate moments, and how none of it had been as real as he had thought. Everything felt like a facade now. The silence between them was deafening. The apartment felt like a tomb, empty, hollow. The ringing in his ears was louder than anything else. He sat down on the edge of their bed, his head in his hands, wondering if he would ever feel whole again. And yet, as much as he blamed himself for what had happened, there was still a voice in his head that refused to let go of the truth he had discovered. Emma, his daughter. He couldn't forget her, not now that she had been thrust into his life. He couldn't just turn his back on her. But how could he build a relationship with her when everything he had with Olivia was crumbling? He grabbed his phone and dialed Olivia's number again, his fingers trembling as he did. She had ignored every call, every text. He felt desperate, needing her to hear him, to understand. The phone rang, but when it went to voicemail, a sharp wave of panic rushed through him. "Olivia, please," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust, but I need you. I need you to hear me out. I need you to understand. This isn't just about Emma. This is about us. I don't want to lose you. Please call me back. Please." But the phone went silent. The weight of his words hung in the air, and he couldn't escape the feeling that he might never hear from her again. Olivia hadn't spoken to Alex since she walked out. The silence between them had been suffocating, almost unbearable. She had spent the first few days at her sister's house, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions crashing over her. Anger, disbelief, sadness. Each one a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. She couldn't bring herself to talk to Alex. The hurt was too raw. He had kept this from her for years, and now, in a single moment, everything had changed. She thought she knew him better than anyone else. They had built a life together, had shared so much. But this was something she wasn't prepared for. She remembered their first few years of marriage. The laughter, the late-night talks, the quiet moments they shared. She had trusted him completely. He had been her rock, her confidant, the one person she could always rely on. But now she felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down at a future that was completely different from the one she had imagined. What hurt the most wasn't just that he had kept such a massive secret from her. It was the fact that he hadn't thought she was worthy of knowing the truth. The fact that, in his mind, he had somehow believed he could carry this burden alone. What did that say about how he viewed their marriage? Olivia sat on the couch at her sister's house, looking out the window, feeling the emptiness settle into her bones. Her sister had tried to comfort her, tried to tell her that Alex's actions didn't define him, that people made mistakes. But Olivia couldn't see past the betrayal. She wasn't sure she wanted to. She thought about Emma, the little girl who had suddenly been thrust into her life. Olivia had never wanted children, had never felt that maternal instinct that some women seem to possess. But now, knowing that Emma was Alex's daughter, it felt like another betrayal. As though Alex had been living a double life, one with her, and one with a child he had kept hidden. The truth was, Olivia didn't know what to do with all the emotions flooding her. She didn't know how to process the anger, the pain, or the confusion, and she certainly didn't know how to forgive him. Olivia stood up, walking over to the window, her hand pressed against the glass. She had to make a decision. She couldn't keep running from this, but she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to face it yet. The days blurred together for Olivia. The quiet isolation at her sister's house had given her time to reflect, to stew in the hurt that Alex's confession had caused. But it wasn't just the betrayal that ate away at her. It was the loss. She had always thought that their love was untouchable. Now, it felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. Her sister had stopped trying to offer advice. She'd made it clear that Olivia needed to come to terms with everything in her own time. And so, Olivia spent her nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. Her thoughts often returned to Emma, the daughter she had never known existed. The idea of another woman and a child, so intricately tied to Alex's life, left Olivia feeling raw, exposed. Was she wrong to feel like an outsider in this story? After all, Alex hadn't just kept Emma from her. He'd kept the very essence of his past and the things that truly mattered to him hidden. She had shared a life with him, but it was only part of the truth. The ache inside her was unbearable. She missed Alex in ways she didn't understand. Despite everything, despite the secrets, despite the walls between them now, she still felt drawn to him. The thought of him out there, dealing with his own pain alone, twisted something deep inside her. She had to admit it. Her love for him was still there. But was it enough to rebuild the trust that had been shattered? And yet, in the midst of this storm, Olivia wasn't sure what she wanted. A part of her wanted to reach out, to ask Alex to explain everything. She longed for him to come back and fix this, to show her that there was still something left of the man she had married. But another part of her, perhaps the stronger part, was afraid of what she might find if she gave him that chance. Alex's world was a fog. His heart felt like it was sinking further with each passing moment. Every time he checked his phone, there was nothing from Olivia. No texts, no missed calls, no sign that she was willing to talk to him. The silence was unbearable. He had tried everything. He had sent her messages, left voicemails, written her heartfelt letters. But nothing worked. It was as if Olivia had vanished from his life completely, leaving him in a limbo of longing and guilt. The days felt like an eternity. His only solace came from the brief moments when he could see Emma. The little girl had come into his life like a force of nature, an unexpected blessing, but a blessing nonetheless. Every time he saw her, his heart ached with love for her, but also with guilt. He had no right to be a father to her. He had no right to bring her into this fractured world, but he couldn't turn away from her. She needed him just as much as Olivia needed him. He sat in his car, parked in front of the apartment, staring at his phone. He had finally reached a breaking point. His love for Olivia, his guilt over Emma, his fears for the future, all of it had become too much to bear. With trembling hands, Alex dialed Olivia's number again. This time, as the phone rang, he felt a flicker of hope. She might not answer. She might hate him, but he had to try. When the call finally connected, Alex's heart stopped. Her voice, soft, guarded, was on the other end. "Alex," Olivia said, her tone distant but clear. I've been thinking." He could barely breathe. The mere sound of her voice after all this time sent a rush of emotion through him. Everything he had been holding inside threatening to spill over. "Olivia, Listen," she interrupted, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet. I don't even know if I can understand why you kept this from me. But I need time. Time." It felt like both a lifeline and a death sentence. Time meant waiting, it meant uncertainty, but it also meant a chance to rebuild. "Olivia, I'm sorry. I am so sorry," Alex whispered, his voice breaking. "I was a coward. I thought I was protecting you, but I wasn't. I was hurting us both. I'll do anything, please just give me a chance to make it right." There was silence for a long moment, and Alex thought the line had gone dead. But then Olivia spoke again, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable. "I don't know what I'm doing, Alex," she said softly. "I don't know if I can come back from this, but I'm willing to try. I think I owe it to myself, and maybe to us, to figure out what this means." Alex's heart lifted, but it was a fragile lift, one that could be shattered by a single misstep. "I'll wait for you," he said quietly. "I'll wait as long as it takes." Alex's days had become a blur of meetings, phone calls, and restless nights. But the only thing that mattered, the thing that filled his every thought, was Olivia. He'd had no idea how deeply the silence between them would cut. Even though she had agreed to talk, the distance between them was suffocating. The coldness in her voice that night on the phone replayed in his mind over and over, like a mantra he couldn't escape. "I need time," she had said. Time? What did that even mean? How much time? What was she thinking? Was she making a decision? Or was she simply biding her time, waiting for the day when she would leave for good? He tried to keep his mind focused on Emma. She was a light in his life now, a reminder that some things, despite all the brokenness, could still be pure. But even in his moments of joy with Emma, there was always a shadow. He couldn't stop thinking about how he had kept this secret from Olivia, the woman who had given him everything. He had let her build a life with him, a life that, at its core, had been a lie. Every time he looked at Emma, the weight of his own failures crushed him. He couldn't stand the idea that he was a disappointment to both of them. And still, despite it all, his desire to heal things with Olivia remained. He had never wanted anything more. Olivia sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window as the world outside moved by, seemingly untouched by the storm that had taken over her life. It had been a few days since she spoke to Alex. He had tried calling again, but she didn't have the strength to answer. She couldn't give him false hope. She couldn't let him believe that everything would be okay with just a few words of apology. But as much as she fought it, there was a part of her that missed him. She missed the way he made her laugh, the way they used to talk for hours about everything and nothing. She missed the man she thought she knew. And now, all she had were fragmented memories and a man she no longer recognized. A man who had kept his biggest secret hidden from her. Her emotions were tangled, a mess of love and resentment, pain and longing. It was as if the rug had been pulled out from under her, leaving her to navigate a new reality she hadn't asked for. The woman she had been before, carefree, confident, seemed so distant now. How could she ever trust herself again, let alone him? And then there was Emma. Olivia had never considered what it would be like to share Alex with another woman, let alone a child. A part of her had always imagined their future together, just the two of them building a life of their own. But now, Alex had another responsibility. He had another family. And though Olivia's mind screamed at her to walk away, another part of her felt like she couldn't. She was trapped in a constant battle between the love she still felt for him and the anger that had taken root in her heart. Every night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was making a mistake by considering forgiveness. Was she simply trying to avoid the pain of letting go? Or was she truly ready to fight for their marriage? A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. It was her sister. "I brought you some dinner," she said, holding up a bag of takeout. "How are you doing?" Olivia forced a smile, taking the bag and placing it on the counter. She couldn't bring herself to tell her sister the truth. Not yet. "I'm okay. Just trying to figure things out." Her sister studied her, eyes narrowing. "You're not okay. You're hurting. But you have to ask yourself, Olivia, can you forgive him? Can you live with this?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Olivia wanted to scream, to lash out at the unfairness of it all. But instead, she simply nodded, fighting back the tears. "I don't know," she whispered. "I really don't know." Her sister didn't press her further, but the conversation lingered. Could she forgive him? Did she even want to? Olivia had no answers. She just had a heart full of doubt and a mind that refused to let go. The silence in Olivia's apartment had become a constant companion. The hours spent alone in the stillness were draining, suffocating. She had allowed herself to close the door on Alex, to create this distance between them. But as time passed, the truth began to weigh on her in a way she wasn't prepared for. She had been avoiding the one thing that had always been Alex's way of communicating when words failed him: a letter. She hadn't opened it yet, not since it arrived a week ago. Its arrival had sent a jolt through her. One of anger, yes, but also a deep, aching curiosity. She had placed it on the kitchen counter the moment it arrived, its envelope clean and pristine, untouched by time. There was something about a letter that forced a person to sit down, to stop running from the feelings and confront them head on. But Olivia wasn't ready. She had to be careful. She was on the edge of breaking, and she wasn't sure she could handle whatever Alex might say, whatever truth he might reveal. But today was different. The silence had finally become too loud. Olivia stood up and walked slowly to the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest. She picked up the letter, her fingers trembling as she slid the edge of the envelope open. It was a letter filled with the weight of everything Alex had never said. The letter was his confession, his raw, unfiltered apology. It was only 2 pages, but each word cut through her, shattering the wall she had built. "I never meant to hurt you, Olivia," it began. "I was afraid that if you knew, you'd leave me. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only hiding from myself. You didn't deserve the truth withheld from you. You deserved better. You deserved all of me." She couldn't stop reading. His words seeped into her, slow and painful. The man she had loved was still there, but buried under layers of lies. She could feel his regret in every sentence, the ache in his words like a mirror to her own heartbreak. But even as she read, the resentment didn't fade. It remained, growing sharper as the final lines loomed. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance. But if there's even the smallest part of you that still wants me in your life, I will wait. I'll wait forever, Olivia. I will wait for you to heal. The letter fell from her hands, landing softly on the floor. Olivia's chest tightened, her breath shallow as she tried to process the rawness of it all. She felt exposed, as though Alex had ripped open the deepest part of her heart. She had never wanted to hurt him, but his words stung as much as they comforted. She couldn't decide whether she was grateful for his honesty or angry that he had waited so long to tell her. Did it matter anymore? Could she forgive him? And if she did, could they ever go back to who they were before? The night Alex had been waiting for had finally arrived. It was their first real face-to-face meeting since Olivia had left. The air between them was heavy, thick with the things left unsaid. Alex sat in his car, parked outside the small cafe where they had agreed to meet. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, heart racing. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but the fear of never seeing her again pushed him forward. Olivia had told him she would come, that she wanted to talk. But even now, standing on the precipice of what could be their final conversation, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. The letter had been sent, the apologies made, but nothing could undo the hurt that had built up between them. As the minutes passed, the anticipation seemed to stretch forever. He watched the door of the cafe, waiting for Olivia to appear. He had no idea what would happen when she did, no idea if she would walk in with anger or forgiveness in her eyes. Then, at last, she appeared. Olivia, looking as beautiful as ever, but there was something different in the way she moved, the way she held herself. She was guarded, careful, her eyes betraying nothing. When she saw him, she hesitated for only a moment before walking toward him. He stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. As she neared, he could feel the distance between them, a chasm that had grown wider and deeper since the day he had revealed his secret. "I got your letter," Olivia said, her voice steady, but tinged with something Alex couldn't quite place. He could feel the weight of her words, the underlying sadness beneath her calm exterior. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I wish I could undo it all. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." She took a deep breath, her eyes softening for the briefest moment. "I know, Alex. I know you didn't mean it, but that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change how I feel." The words hit him like a slap. She wasn't angry, not anymore, but the hurt was there, buried deep within her, and Alex knew it would take more than just words to fix it. They stood there for a moment, facing each other, the weight of their shared history pressing down on both of them. Finally, Olivia spoke again, her voice softer now. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can go back to the way we were." The words sliced through Alex, but he held on to them like a lifeline. At least she was talking to him. At least she hadn't walked away. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Olivia," he said, his voice raw. "But if there's a chance, if there's even the smallest possibility that we can find a way back, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll wait for you. I'll wait for as long as it takes." Olivia took a step back, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, it seemed as though she might say something, but instead, she simply nodded. "I don't know what comes next, Alex, but maybe we can try." It was a fragile promise, but it was enough for now. And for the first time in a long time, Alex felt a flicker of hope. The days that followed the meeting at the cafe felt like an eternity for Alex. The brief exchange with Olivia had been filled with more unspoken words than he could count. They had said enough to acknowledge the depth of their pain, but nothing had been resolved. Nothing had changed. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had made one last attempt to reach her, and that maybe it had been futile. Olivia hadn't called. She hadn't texted. The silence in his apartment was deafening, and for the first time in months, he began to question everything he had once believed in. His life, his choices, his future. It was as if the very foundation of his existence had been shaken to its core. He spent hours thinking about their time together, recalling every moment of joy they had shared. The laughter, the quiet mornings, the way they used to finish each other's sentences. Those memories, once so comforting, now felt like cruel reminders of what he had lost. The love he had taken for granted seemed so fragile in hindsight, like glass waiting to shatter. His thoughts often wandered to Emma, the little girl whose existence had been the catalyst for all this destruction. He loved her, but even his bond with her couldn't fill the hole in his heart that Olivia had once occupied. He wondered if she could ever forgive him for bringing this chaos into her life. Could she understand why he had kept such a monumental secret from the woman he claimed to love? Was there any chance that Olivia would find it in her heart to forgive him and rebuild their shattered family? But every time he tried to reach out, the silence mocked him. He sent another text, then deleted it. He tried calling, but his hands would tremble, and he couldn't bring himself to hear her voice. Not yet. Not until he knew what to say. He had said it all already, but none of it seemed enough. Olivia spent her nights in a daze. The promise of a second chance with Alex had weighed heavily on her mind, but every time she tried to picture their future together, she was engulfed by the same overwhelming sense of uncertainty. The scar of betrayal was still fresh, and though the possibility of healing lingered in the back of her mind, it felt like a distant dream she didn't dare to reach for. She had spent the last few days rethinking every moment of their relationship, trying to find a thread that would pull them back together. But all she found was a web of contradictions. There were moments when she thought she could forgive him, when she thought they could work through the mess they had created. But then there were moments when she thought of how he had lied, how he had kept Emma from her, and the thought twisted her stomach into knots. As much as she loved him, as much as the idea of a life without Alex broke her heart, she wasn't sure she could walk that path again. She was a different person now, someone shaped by her pain, someone more guarded and less trusting than she had been before. Olivia had kept a journal throughout their relationship, a habit she had developed during the early days when everything felt new and exciting. She had written about the little things, the way Alex smiled when he saw her after a long day, how he would make her coffee every morning, the way he would always hold her hand when they went for walks. She had also written about the time she had felt unheard, unseen, when his ambition had overshadowed their connection. But now, as she leafed through the pages, she could no longer find the person she had been back then. The woman who had trusted him with everything. The woman who had thought that love was enough to make everything work. That woman was gone, buried beneath the weight of a truth she never could have imagined. Her phone buzzed beside her, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from her sister, asking how she was holding up. Olivia hadn't answered her in days. She hadn't spoken to anyone. But this time, she hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing a response. "I'm not okay. I don't know what to do anymore." The message was brief, but as she sent it, she felt the weight of it lift slightly. She was no longer alone in her uncertainty. Someone cared enough to ask. But when she tried to look ahead, to picture a life with Alex, the thought was too painful. The betrayal, the uncertainty, it was all too much. And yet, there was still a part of her that longed for the future they had once dreamed of. Maybe she was just afraid, but maybe fear wasn't enough to rebuild everything they had lost. Olivia sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers gripping the edges of the worn comforter as she stared out the window at the darkened sky. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but in her heart, everything felt dim. The weight of the decision she had been avoiding for so long pressed down on her, suffocating her. Every minute that passed felt like another moment wasted in indecision. She had always prided herself on being someone who knew what she wanted. But now, she felt lost. There were moments when the thought of forgiving Alex felt right, like a natural progression, a chance to rebuild what they had broken. She had wanted this life, his love, their family, the dream they had once shared. But there were also moments when her heart ached with betrayal. The thought of trusting him again, of opening herself up to the possibility of pain and loss, felt like an impossible choice. She had loved him with everything she had, and it had been shattered in the blink of an eye. Could she really risk it all again? Her phone buzzed, and she instinctively reached for it, half expecting it to be Alex. But it wasn't. It was a message from her best friend, Sarah, checking in on her. Olivia had been keeping her distance from everyone except for her sister, and even that had felt like too much. But tonight, the message felt like a lifeline. "Olivia, I know you're hurting, but you don't have to do this alone. Let me help you." Tears welled in her eyes as she read Sarah's words. She hadn't realized how much she had been pushing people away until this moment. For weeks, she had been drowning in her own confusion, her own pain, and she hadn't even realized how isolated she had become. Taking a deep breath, Olivia replied, "I don't know what to do anymore. Everything feels like it's falling apart. I'm not sure I can go back to him, Sarah." Her phone buzzed again almost immediately. "You don't have to make any decisions tonight, Liv. Just breathe. Take things one step at a time." Olivia's chest tightened, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt something akin to relief. She wasn't alone. She didn't have to face this alone. She closed her eyes, her mind replaying everything Alex had said, everything he had done. His apology, the vulnerability in his voice, the hope he had clung to, waiting for her to see him for who he was now. Not the man who had made mistakes, but the man who had learned from them. But could she ever see him that way? Could she believe him? She didn't know. But tonight, at least, she wasn't forced to answer that question. The days that followed were a blur. Olivia's heart felt heavy, yet strangely lighter at the same time. She had taken a small but significant step. She had allowed herself to feel something other than anger and confusion. The wall she had spent weeks building had cracked just a little, and that was enough to make her wonder if healing was possible. She hadn't seen Alex since their brief meeting at the cafe. She had kept her distance, but her thoughts constantly returned to him, to them, to what they once had, and to what could have been if he hadn't kept Emma a secret for so long. She couldn't ignore the depth of her feelings, even if they were tangled with resentment and fear. She needed space. Space to think, space to breathe. And so, she took it, a weekend away, by herself. A small cottage by the lake. Her sister, understanding the need for solitude, had agreed to take care of her responsibilities. It was the first time in months that Olivia had felt like she could breathe freely, without the weight of expectations or unanswered questions. As she sat on the porch, watching the gentle ripples of the lake stretch out before her, Olivia allowed herself to remember. She thought of the first time she had met Alex, the way he had made her laugh effortlessly, how his smile had felt like a promise. She had never expected to fall so hard, so fast, and for a long time, she had thought they were perfect together. But now, she wasn't sure if they could ever be that again. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "You're allowed to feel uncertain, Liv. But remember, you deserve someone who will fight for you. You deserve to be loved completely, without hesitation." Olivia's eyes blurred with tears as she read the message. Her heart ached, not just for Alex, but for herself. She had loved with everything she had, and it had never been enough. Could she love him again after all that had happened? Could she trust him enough to allow herself to love him, without the constant fear of betrayal? She wasn't sure yet, but tonight, the stars shining brightly above her felt like a reminder that hope was still possible. Even in the darkest of times, there was still light. Olivia's heart fluttered as she sat in the car, her fingers trembling on the steering wheel. It had been days since she had returned from the cottage, and the stillness of the retreat had given her clarity, but clarity didn't always bring peace. She had come to a decision, and now she was about to face the consequences. She pulled up in front of Alex's apartment, the familiar building standing cold and unmoving in the late afternoon light. The thought of seeing him again filled her with both dread and longing. She had spent so many nights imagining this moment, how she would confront him, how she would make him see the depth of the hurt he had caused. But now, as she sat there in her car, she realized something she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't the anger that had kept her away for so long. It was the fear. The fear that no matter how hard she tried, things could never be the same. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car. Her footsteps echoed in the empty parking lot as she approached the entrance. She paused for a moment, her hand hovering over the buzzer. What was she expecting? A miracle? A perfect reunion? She knew better than to believe in fairy tales. The buzzer sounded, and the door clicked open. Alex was waiting for her, standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. He hadn't changed. He still looked the same, his hair slightly longer, his clothes more casual, but his eyes, those eyes still held the same depth of emotion she had once fallen in love with. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm so glad you came." She didn't respond immediately. She stood there, her chest tight, trying to find the words that had evaded her for for so long. The silence between them stretched thin, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if we can fix this, Alex. I don't know if I can forgive you." The words hung in the air, and the look on his face shattered her heart. She knew that he had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to tell him it was going to be okay. But how could it be? How could things ever be okay when so much had been broken? The room felt colder than it ever had before. Alex took a hesitant step toward her, his hand reaching out, but Olivia instinctively pulled back. She hadn't expected forgiveness, not really, but to stand here now, to see the weight of his disappointment on his face. It hurt in a way she hadn't anticipated. "I never wanted to hurt you," Alex said softly, his voice breaking. "I was scared. I was so afraid of losing you. I thought if I told you about Emma, everything would fall apart. I thought if I waited, things would be different. I didn't realize how much I was pushing you away by not being honest. By keeping this secret." Olivia closed her eyes, feeling the sting of his words. How many times had she replayed that moment in her mind? How many nights had she cried, asking herself why he hadn't trusted her enough to be honest from the beginning? But now, standing here in front of him, she realized something she hadn't before. The truth wasn't just about what he had hidden. It was about the life they had shared, the love they had built, and the trust that had been broken. Could that trust ever be restored? "I don't know, Alex," Olivia whispered. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the weight of their shared history hung between them. She had loved him. She had loved him with everything she had. But love was complicated. It wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about healing. And she wasn't sure if that was something they could do together. Tears welled in Alex's eyes, and he took another step toward her. This time, she didn't pull away. She couldn't. There was something in the way he looked at her, a depth of vulnerability and regret that pulled at her heart. "I will spend every day proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust again," he said, his voice steady, but the emotion was unmistakable. "I will fight for you, for us, because I don't want to live without you, Olivia. I can't." The silence that followed his words felt like an eternity. Olivia didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if she could forgive him. She wasn't sure if they could ever go back to what they were. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Maybe hope was enough to start again. Maybe love was enough to rebuild from the rubble. Taking a shaky breath, Olivia stepped forward. She reached for him, and for the first time in months, she let herself believe in the possibility of healing. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if they would ever be the same. But for now, for this moment, she was willing to take a step into the unknown together. In the quiet aftermath of betrayal and longing, Olivia and Alex's story asks us, can we truly rebuild what's been broken? Can trust, once shattered, ever be restored? The weight of their journey mirrors our own struggles, reminding us that healing doesn't come easily, and love is never as simple as it seems. But there's always a chance, a spark of hope that can light the darkest paths. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever wondered whether forgiveness is possible, share this moment with others who might be feeling the same. Like, comment, and let us know, what do you think is the true cost of love? And if this touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so we can continue this emotional journey together. Because sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most beautiful victories. Don't let this story end here. Join us for more.